Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending today. For those of you who know me, it's great to see everyone. For those of you who don't, my name is Gina DeLuca. I'm a dietitian here with Perlmutter Cancer Center at NYU Langone Hospital, Long Island. And I am very grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today about nutrition for breast cancer prevention. I'd like to thank my colleague Cheryl Brancato for asking me to speak today. And, just really happy to be able to share this information for all of you. It seemed like this was a topic that people had a lot of questions about, so happy to participate today. So let's get started. So again, I work here on Long Island and cover patients on treatment, also helping patients pre-treatment and now into post-treatment survivorship. So very exciting opportunity to be able to help many of our cancer patients, and especially breast. I cover breast as one of our diagnoses. So, happy to really get the information out there, and especially in regard to prevention. So our objectives for today, we're going to learn why balanced whole food nutrition is your best ally in breast health, learn which foods actually pack a really powerful nutritional punch, and also discuss practical ways to incorporate these foods and other helpful lifestyle behaviors into your regular daily life. So I think, for me, that's the most important part, is giving not only the information that we know works, but the ways to put it into practice. We're all busy, we all want simple things. So hopefully this really helps in that regard. So I think this is staggering. So this myth, cancer is often genetic and, I just can't do anything about it. But the truth of the matter is about 40% of cancer cases can in fact be prevented. And nutrition is a powerful piece of that equation. My colleague Amanda Bontempo had actually introduced the slide to me for another presentation we had worked on, and I was just blown away by it because that's a pretty large percentage. So to think that we can be empowered in that way is pretty awesome, in my opinion. So happy to share with you that we have tools to do this. And so how do we do this? We fight cancer with our forks. That's become a big phrase and a catchphrase that our clinical team loves to use. And so if we think about the power, it's just awesome. So let's take a look at how we can delve into that a little bit deeper. So nutrition and breast cancer specifically, I had to focus there and start this off there because this was actually sort of a project that came out of collaboration, especially with, one of our physicians on site here, Dr. Gina DeLuca. We had been collaborating, in a multidisciplinary way some time ago, probably over a year ago at this point. And between medical and surgical oncology, we wanted to develop a resource that would give the information that patients were asking about. Nutrition is such a hot topic. I'm always so grateful for the opportunities to present on this. And, so my colleague, Rebecca, who works in Manhattan and covers breast, Rebecca Hirsch, we were talking about, seeing that patients ask the same questions, like patients just have these concerns and questions. So how could we make a resource, an educational resource, because that was the goal, to be able to give people this information. So we worked together over a period of time and we designed a handout, which is actually available, in Epic for all of us, for patients. And there's a couple of different formats. One in Epic, this is actually the one that I love because it's in PDF form where you've got the colors, you've got the graphics. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very visual. I love pictures. I love describing through analogies. And so we took all those questions and we put it into this. So I actually decided to use this as the basis for this presentation, because the information is universal. It's a lot of the same questions. And what we're going to do in the following slides here is we're going to go into a breakdown of each of these topics. But just to kind of see, it's simple, it's concise, but it's got everything packed in there that you really need to get started with. And the good thing about this is it's not only, let's say breast cancer on treatment, it's breast cancer really for prevention, because all of these recommendations cross over all the different points on the continuum of prevention, treatment, and survivorship. So topics we're going to cover today: healthy eating, a healthy diet pattern, and foods to include. I use the phrase diet pattern because the word diet is way too restrictive. The word die is actually in the word diet. I was taught that a long time ago, so we have to be very careful with. And, diet orders are different when patients need special diets. But, the diet pattern of what we're doing on a period, like let's say over a period of time on a daily basis, what sort of trends out over time, because the variety is the most important thing. We want to open ourselves up to getting as many nutrients as possible. So that's where we're going to focus on what to include. What to avoid, we'll touch on that, just, for safekeeping. We're going to focus on dairy and soy because these are two topics we get so many questions about. And then I'm happy to clarify the truths because there are a lot of myths out there. The American Institute for Cancer Research, the new American plate model that they put out is a really good visual for using, just sort of your portions of the different foods to be able to get the different nutrients you need in the right amounts. Definitely covering dietary supplements because we all know that's a hot topic. Alcohol intake, exercise, and some additional resources. So the brainchild of this handout that we created, of which I'm going to present these guidelines. So we actually had referenced, it was in Advances in Nutrition, is a journal put out by the American Society for Nutrition. And this was sort of the one thing that we were able to find that touched on, like, when we meet patients, let's say on treatment, and we assess them, what are the goals nutritionally? We want to preserve lean body mass. We do want to avoid an increase in fat mass where possible because we know estrogen is connected and that can have issues there. But we really want to focus on the personalized aspect, nutrition intervention based on someone's dietary habits, their schedule, what's feasible, activities that they're participating in, and also cultural preferences. And, just sort of in this review, the daily energy intake distribution was less than 30% fat. So we were really wanting to focus on the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated. Two big words that basically come down to fats found in plants versus fats found in animals, which are your saturated fat. Now, saturated fat has been shown to be linked more closely to increasing breast cancer risk. So we want to try to minimize that where possible, focus on the fats in plants, which will tie into later slides about a plant-forward diet. That's really where we want to focus anyhow. And with that, about 55% of whole food carbohydrates, whole grains, fruits, whole foods. And then the protein, don't worry about the gram part, that was just given here, but really it's about 20%. So when you have your plate, you want it to be, let's say, 55%, like half or a little more than half, those whole food, plant foods, 20% protein, maybe some animal protein there, but on the lean side, maybe plant-based protein, and then again, that fat rounded out. Fruits and vegetables, heavy, heavy, heavy concentration there. So about 5 to 9 servings per day, and food-based sources of all these other vitamins and minerals. Again, to just sort of touch on supplements, the foods provide nutrients in their true form. So when your body eats those foods, your body recognizes those foods better. So unless there's a clinical deficiency, we don't want to focus too much on taking these types of supplements. But again, we'll touch on that a little bit more in a later slide. But particularly for vegetables, cruciferous vegetables are really super important. So visual slide here, we've got our broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, kale, all kinds of, certain greens that fall into this family that were shown throughout this review to really be awesome because they have protective components, little phytochemicals, little plant compounds that help. So generally averaging out, you want to try to consume about a cup, which is equivalent to about 8 ounces if you measure that way, daily. Cooked, that's not too hard to do. And what I like about this family is that they're so widespread, they're so versatile. So if you don't like broccoli, but you like kale, great. Including garlic also gives an extra protective effect. So sauteing up some kale with olive oil and garlic, and you're good to go. So that was sort of the basis. And then coming out of it, we looked at, okay, so what's a healthy eating pattern? What should be included? Fruits, again, especially vegetables. And I like the extensive list here because it really kind of hones in on, again, a wide variety. Many, many ways to utilize these foods. Adding garlic, lean protein. So again, you've got some animal products, that's fine. Also some plant-based foods if you want to venture out a little bit that way. Moving into dairy, again, low-fat dairy. So it doesn't have to be fat-free. If you prefer that, that's fine for taste, for digestion, what have you. But a low-fat dairy, a 1% or even a 2% now and then is fine. When we're getting into whole milk, it's a higher saturated fat content. So again, once in a while, it's fine. But if you're eating dairy servings on a consistent basis every day, you really want to go with the low-fat dairy. That's actually been shown in studies to have a protective effect against colorectal cancer. So, feeding 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. I love that phrase lately. But really hitting these touch points and maximizing what you're eating and how it's helping. Whole grains and root starches, whole grains are really coming to the forefront now. Just so many ways to utilize these. cold salads, warm with recipes, lots of different ways too. And then your whole foods too, your potatoes, your corn, your winter squashes. Carbs are not bad. Carbs are necessary and they're good. If they're in this form, they're superior. So go for it. Healthy fats, we again want to focus on the plant-based side, nuts, seeds, avocados. If you're using oils, plant-based oils like olive oil, avocado oil, canola oil, those are preferred. Small amounts of coconut are fine too. Again, this is sort of separate from any food allergies that people have, but coconut does have some saturated fat, but it is a plant-based saturated fat, so it's better than an animal-based saturated fat. We just don't want to have too much of it. I think used sparingly, it can fit, and we just have to factor it in that way. So foods to avoid, processed meats particularly are a great offender. So again, every once in a while, we can factor these things in, but on a consistent basis, these are things that can tend to have nitrates and other types of components that we have to be really careful with. Also excessive red meat from non-organic sources, because then we're getting into, let's say, lots of hormones, antibiotics, lots of things there that can potentially interfere with hormone production. But again, lean red meat once in a while can completely fit. If you're a red meat eater, don't despair. We can make everything work. But we really do want to try to focus on eliminating the most refined foods as much as possible. Again, once in a while for a treat, for a special occasion, that's when we want to reserve it for. It's on the consistent daily basis that these, white flours, white sugars, they've been really stripped of their nutrients. And some of them are lucky to have nutrients put back in. But again, it's more of a synthetic form of the nutrient. So the absorption in some cases can be questionable. So it's sort of empty calories where you could otherwise be getting all of these, plant-based components in foods to optimize. And refined oils as well, because unfortunately, a lot of these refined oils can actually act like saturated fats. So even though they're not saturated per se, they can convert to a saturated fat in the body. And then again, the high-fat dairy products only if frequently consumed. So perfect segue into dairy. So questions often arise about dairy and risk for breast cancer. This usually centers on the trace hormone levels and fat content found in some products, although to date, research has not shown a direct link between dairy and breast cancer. Again, it's sort of the flip side that with the low-fat dairy, there are so many positive nutrients that may be linked to helping prevent breast cancer and other types of cancer like colorectal cancer. Although, again, we're always sort of flipping back and forth and things are relative, looking at the relativity. Data has shown that frequent consumption of high-fat dairy products, whole milk, butter, etc., before menopause may increase risk. So again, it's possibility, not definite, but again, factoring it all in as a big picture. But I do find that when people do want to eat dairy products, organic is preferred because it actually tastes better in a lot of cases. And, there are ways to work around cost. If you buy things on sale, that's helpful. Sometimes, access is an issue. If that's all that you have access to, don't despair. It's like conventional food versus organic. You're still going to get the nutritional benefit from it. So it's again, diet pattern over time. So I think even more than dairy, soy is definitely an issue of, just query for people. I think we probably get the most questions on this as a food source. So some studies have found a decrease in breast cancer recurrence in people who regularly consume soy-based foods. Other studies, however, show the opposite. So we've got this controversial component. What we're kind of looking at, though, is the big picture. And saying, okay, so the unprocessed whole food sources have shown, those are the food sources that have shown benefit. It's the processed soy that really is questionable. I don't know how it just mechanism of action, how it converts in the body, but we need to be careful with that. So especially for like our patients on treatment, we have them avoid all kinds of soy supplements, pills, powders, really processed meat analogs. If you're eating a lot of that over time, it's just questionable. It's sort of a wild card. We don't know. So rather than put you at that risk, let's hold back. We've got so many other foods to work with. But if you do want to have soy, non-GMO organic is preferred if you can find it if possible. And things like tofu, tempeh, edamame, soy nuts, even natto. I learned in creating this handout with Rebecca what natto was. So it's a fermented soybean delicacy. Haven't tried it yet, look forward to, but just opening our minds up to different things. Soy milk as milk alternative. soy yogurts, cheeses, and plant-based meat alternatives in moderation. You know, again, if that's all that's available and you don't want to eat red meat or another animal protein, it's good. So again, that relativity factors in. But I think these foods can really be helpful ways to segue into the plant-based protein world. They're so versatile. One of the things I love about tofu tempeh, they take on the flavor of whatever you put them in. So you can make them in so many different ways and they don't have to be bland or boring. It's really simple to just add them in. So I hope that clarifies some of that question. The New American Plate. So I love this because, again, being visual, using plant-based ingredients as the foundation of your plate, adding small amounts of animal protein up to 3 ounces is good. So again, lean sources if you want to, or substituting your plant-based proteins, but kind of giving that visual that we want this meal to be as produce heavy as possible. 2 or more kinds of vegetables, different colors if possible, because then again, you're getting the different phytochemicals from those. And then if you're adding in a fruit serving and a dairy or a dairy alternative, like a cup of soy milk on the side, you're getting an even more nutritionally balanced meal. And you're covering the basis of getting all of those, what we call micronutrients, your little vitamins and minerals, all the little workers that help us to break down our food and help our bodies to use our food as best as possible. So what we find happens is that when people eat whole food and they're not eating, let's say, refined and broken down food, you know, or synthesized food, you're just getting a better absorption, a better feeling overall, because your body is getting those tiny little nutrients that it needs. They're like little worker bees. They do what they need to do and they get in there and they perform the functions that need to happen in a really efficient way. So this for me is like, you know, knowing that, how do we translate that into what people can do? So I love the visual aspect of this. So we'll just touch on dietary supplements. So again, a whole food plant-based way of eating really does provide nutrients in packages. So what I love about this is that the packages that contain these various nutritional components are meant to work together. It's sort of, so Amanda always says, and I love this, that the sum of the, oh goodness, I'm gonna mess this up. So it's like, basically the sum is bigger than the parts, right? So like the individual parts all play their role, but when they work together, they're that much more powerful. So it's the way to go where possible. It's when our bodies have to work with nutrients in isolation, it's the process is not as efficient. This is why, like, so an example of this is like a vitamin B complex. So if somebody needs a B vitamin for some reason in isolation, they may have to take a single supplement. But if they're looking to take it to get the overall benefit and it's clinically appropriate, the B complex is usually the better way to go because you're getting the nutrients in the right proportions, in the right amounts to be able to work together the right way. Sometimes when we isolate certain nutrients, it throws the balance of the other things off and then can create, you know, more problems down the road. So just like here, so unless we have a medically diagnosed clinical deficiency, we want to be really cautious about what we're taking. Discuss it with your healthcare team, have them do recent blood work, you know, just make sure that everything is within line of what you actually need and not over and above. There's a lot, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation out there. And so for our patients, like we really encourage, don't Google, let me be your filter because it's just too overwhelming. And this is the thing that can actually happen. So I like to just offer that about supplements. So alcohol is another really hot topic that comes up, and it has been established as a risk factor for developing certain types of breast cancer for both pre and postmenopausal women, so across the continuum. Recent research shows that compared to women who do not drink at all, women who even have 1 glass of alcohol per day may increase their risk. And I love these charts. So I'm going to walk you through this. So the current recommendation is that women should have no more than 1 drink per day and men no more than 2 in portioned amounts per type of alcohol. So, you know, again, because of percentage of alcohol, that varies portion to portion for type of alcohol. So we like to put that in. But the daily drinks consumed, so about 1, an increase of about 7 to 10% in risk for breast cancer. About 1 to 2, look at that increase. And then 2 or more, look at that increase. I think when I found this, and Dr. Diablo and I had collaborated on a piece that we wrote for the Mora Foundation, and it was just really, really powerful for me to see this because that's something that we have control over. We can empower ourselves. You know, it's, again, socially once in a while, totally fine. Everything can fit as long as that's fine for any other allergies or conditions that someone has. But I think when we see like that it's not, alcohol is not a necessary nutrient, and it's a very bizarre nutrient because it acts somewhere between a carbohydrate and a fat, calorie and composition wise. So if we can influence our risk that much, I just think it's important to provide this information. So I wanted to make sure I included that. So moving into physical activity. So the American Cancer Society recommends a weekly total of at least 150 minutes of moderate physical activity or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. So basically, light activity is you can do it and you can sing. Moderate is you can't sing, but you can still talk. And vigorous is that you probably can't do any of the three, unless you're performing a rock concert, and that takes a lot of vigorous training, but most of us are not, right? So, but the moderate, there's so many different things you can do just to get started and to build that in. And if that's feasible for someone, you know, for physically what they're capable of doing, beautiful, you're going to get a great benefit from that. And that's at least 150 minutes. So you can increase up and get more benefit with the more that you do. If you prefer vigorous aerobic activity and you're medically feasible to be able to do it, go for it. There's so much available out there. And, you know, you can exercise individually, collectively in groups, so much to be able to take advantage of. But it's a really, really important piece in breast cancer prevention. And just, I always like to mention, be sure to talk with your doctor to see if it's a good time for you to start exercising. You know, we were clear to include this on the resource we created because, you know, you just never know. So you just want to make sure, you know, you have your current, you know, physical workup to make sure. But again, there's so much available. Take advantage of what's there. And I think, you know, we've seen not only does it have a physical benefit, but a mental benefit too, and just really helps to improve quality of life. So we had included resources for more information. These are substantiated resources that we like to provide specific for breast cancer. But for instance, the American Cancer Society, the American Institute, the National Cancer Institute, they all have lots of information about all other types of cancer as well. So, you know, it goes hand in hand. It's, you know, this is mainly focused for breast, but what's wonderful about those resources is they have so many other tips as well. So I love this. Considering nutrition quality a vital sign. So we've got our vital signs that keep us alive and going. And nutrition is starting to be looked at as that. And I just think that's really powerful because what we eat develops us and our bodies and our cells and how we function. So when we look at it that way, it takes some of the stigma off of eating, you know, good or eating bad. It's not about good and bad. It's about quality of life and pattern over time and thriving. I love this, again, being visual. It really just lays out the American Institute for Cancer Research's recommendations for cancer prevention overall. So really encapsulating pretty much everything we've just spoken about, but specific to breast in certain ways. So I encourage you to, you know, visit that site as well. So let's move a little bit more into how do we translate this into practical application. Plant-forward diet pattern, love it. Plant foods are powerful. Oftentimes they're replacing disease promoting foods. So again, filling the space with nutrient, what we call nutrient density, a lot of nutrition in a small space or just in a space in a volume. So a lot of power there. They contain bioactive components like vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, and also antioxidants that help protect cells. They reduce inflammation, blood pressure, and insulin resistance. So they're helping your body to utilize your blood glucose appropriately for energy and not to store it as fat. Support immune function, and contain fiber, which beneficially alter the gut microbiota. So this is important because the microbiome is the storehouse of good bacteria in your intestine. It's so powerful. It works not only physically, but again, you know, mentally in the sense that it communicates the brain and the gut. I'm sorry, the gut and the brain, this is how they communicate. This is how they come together. And plant food is so powerful. So plant foods have what we call prebiotics, which are the food that feed the probiotics, which are the good bacteria in the intestine. So again, really helping to optimize and boost that immune function as much as possible. Cereals, fruits, nuts, you know, pulses like legumes, lentils, spices, and vegetables. And I like to touch on that, So we can't ever take one of these components in isolation. More studies do need to be done, but again, if we're including that pattern, we're hitting as many marks as we possibly can. Spices are powerful. There's a lot of power in them, and you don't need a whole lot. And that's, I think, always reflective. Like, nature is so amazing to me because you can use a little bit and get a lot of effect. So it's almost reflective of that's all you might need to use. We don't need to take supplements that are packed with hundreds of milligrams of these things. We might just need a touch of it, and maybe working it with others in conjunction helps. Like, for instance, turmeric with black pepper, with olive oil or some type of fat component makes a really powerful complex that energizes the effect of the turmeric. So it increases the power of the anti-inflammatory power, the antioxidant power. So little things like that, really, really helpful. And they're so pretty in color too. So I like to touch on the processed food continuum because I think when we hear the term processed food, it can be very daunting, and we can tend to feel like, well, I don't have a farm in my backyard, and I don't, have the time to really make everything absolutely from scratch. So how do I approach this? So I like this continuum that the International Food Information Council put out, because you've got your whole food. You've got minimally processed foods. Washed, packaged fruits and vegetables are an example. Foods processed for preservation, so canned and frozen foods, vegetables, things like that, that you can store over periods of time. So maybe when it's hard to eat seasonally, we've got these other things. Mixtures of combined ingredients. So again, now we're kind of moving over the midpoint, getting a little bit more processed. And again, not that that can't be included ever, but I think we have to be mindful of how much, how often, and look at that relativity of these categories. So if it's the choice between you buying, a fast food Happy Meal or something, compared to a frozen entree that's clean and transparent in its ingredients, let's try to err on that side more often than not, because we're going to get more benefit that way. But I think it really does have to work into your lifestyle. Again, if we're busy or food access is an issue, we have to take this whole picture into consideration. But I think kind of piecing it out over that continuum normalizes a little bit more to say, we're all doing the best we can with this, or if we could do a little better, this is a way, instead of, putting the pressure on. More support than pressure. Okay, so some lifestyle tips to help make it work for you. Food procurement. When you go into the store, shop the perimeter. Try to avoid the inner aisles unless you need things like canned beans that are going to make it quick and you can rinse those. But really staying around the perimeter gives you the fresh food access points versus the really processed food, inside. Trying to visit farmers markets or any venues that have locally grown foods, I think, is really powerful. I love the fact that we have a farmers market here this past summer into fall now, and I just think that's a great way to get connected locally. Food preparation, do it yourself. Like, we could buy things, but the cost is often how much more when we buy it prepackaged. And plus there's the freshness piece. Like, if I found if you buy things that are already cut up, it's not always as fresh as if I buy it and just cut it myself. And sometimes it's half or a third of the cost. So, again, I trend sales. I'm big on that. Why pay more than we have to? And also, but on the flip side, not going to 100 different stores. None of us have time to do that. So how do we kind of, keep it fresh and keep it fluctuating? But really preparing things ourselves really does help along the way. And there's so much available. There's so many recipes available now, whether you're into books and you visit the library or the bookstore, or you go online and you download resources. There's just so much. Like, I think just being in the process of it is really where it's at. Home meal kits, this works for people oftentimes, preparing from ingredients received in kits or heating meals that are already prepared. What I advocate with this is looking for transparent companies that really have minimal ingredients, sustainable practices. There's so many now, it's hard to keep track of, but I think if you can, kind of search that and see. And my other tip with that I'm really big on is call the company. Like, if you're not sure, call the company. And if they can speak very transparently to it, then I trust them. If they hedge around and they can't, click, that phone goes down, I don't bother. And I don't recommend that to people because they have to be able to speak. There has to be a sense of accountability. What I think is good with this, especially for activating the plant forward piece, is activating the sense of taste. So there's actually a study and sort of a methodology, if you will, called the flexitarian flip. And this can be an ally in increasing acceptance of and preference for plant forward meals. So what this was a study done in 2018. And what this showed was that they took I think it was 3 different meals from 3 different cuisines. And they focused on, let's say 75% of the meal being more plant versus 75 being more animal-based. And then with the plant-based meal, they added in spices, flavors, and all kinds of different components. And it actually helped increase the taste acceptance. So I just think that's a powerful way of looking at it, way of approaching it. So I always like to mention that. And edgy veggies, this came across my radar recently, and I just thought it was adorable because, again, being in the visual mindset, it was really powerful because it talked about like on menus. So when we hear, you know, sizzling asparagus or something, it activates our senses in a different way. It activates how we're thinking about it. So to approach it that way too is kind of fun. Instead of thinking it's got to be bland and boring if it's vegetables, think of it more open than that, and we increase our receptivity to trying different things. Maybe I wouldn't have tried radicchio, but now I'm going to try it because I found a dressing that goes with it that I really like to make, and it just activates the taste and the color and the smell and the acceptance of the whole picture. So couldn't help but include that. Choose at least 1 day per week, preferably a non-work day if you can, to meal prep. I think this is really, really helpful across the board because I know for myself too, if it's not in there and ready to go when I'm busy, it's much harder to throw things together. And then it's the stress of the time constraint. So if we can do that and kind of set things up at least for half the week, and then maybe during the week, you can do another day for the rest of the week, but just dedicating that time. It's also very stress releasing to be there and, you know, to be in the kitchen, or to be, you know, or maybe it's not, and maybe it's, you know, if that's not something that you find helpful, then finding other ways, you know, using some sustainable resources and pre-made meals and things like that, but at least to just dedicate the time to making a plan. I think that's where it's at, to really make it as sort of user-friendly as possible and streamlined as possible. Follow the recipe exactly as written the first time you make it, and then getting creative with substitutions. So it gives a template, especially for food science-wise. How do things connect in this recipe? How do they react together? And then maybe it's just not exactly what you would have wanted. So get creative and try some other things. Maybe you don't like the vegetables that are in it, but you're going to add different ones. Maybe you don't like the spices, but you'll add different ones, or whatever it might be. But just really get in there and explore it like it's art. I think that's the best thing to do. Batch cook and then embrace leftovers. Because again, this is really good for convenience, especially when throwing lunches together in the morning or getting home after a long day and making dinner. Invest in high quality kitchen tools when feasible, and organize the kitchen so you're easily able to access these things, because I think that's it too. If we've got stuff tucked away in some cabinet up on top and it's falling on our head as we're trying to get it out, that's disconcerting. So it's discouraging. So if we think of it more as functional, it helps. This was actually from a resource Amanda had passed along to us on site here, and we love it. You know, I think it's a great cookbook, Run Fast, Eat Slow, and it was just really fun. And, you know, it's just, again, practical for being in real life. And so I couldn't help but, as I was cruising through this, to say, you know, let me share this. I think there's a lot of powerful stuff in there. I think it also comes down to mindful eating. About a year and a half ago, 2 of my colleagues from other sites, we had collaborated on a mindful eating workshop series, and that was really powerful. Michelle and Alana and I, we had done a 3-part series, and, you know, for me, it was, when I eat, what shall I think about? That was the question I had chosen to work on. And I think it's important to ask ourselves, like, what do we think about when we eat? Do we think, or are we just so busy because we are so busy? But can we stop and take the time and just cultivate the gratitude and appreciation that even went into creating that food? You know, what might doing that offer us, and how might it benefit us? I just think sometimes it's important to bring that into it because it lends a different dimension. Again, it takes the pressure off and adds support instead. Looking at the aspects involved, sensory, community, spiritual, focusing our attention on the food, the sensory aspect of it, again, all the, you know, sights and smells and whatnot. Investigating about where the food came from. You know, when I think about what it goes, you know, what effort has gone into what's in front of me, it makes a difference. It really makes me grateful, you know, to be able to have that available. And then just tuning into the benefits that it offers from a spiritual perspective, I think can often help. So this was from a substantiated resource that we had kind of utilized as the springboard to help create these presentations and answering these questions. And I just thought that spoke to me. And again, that too, I just wanted to share with you. So I can't, as far as breast cancer goes, prevention of breast cancer and whatnot, I can't help but touch on this topic. I was actually walking across campus one day, and I was passing two colleagues that were talking about, not from our area, but just in general, like just talking about intermittent fasting, and it caught my ear, and I had to keep going, and I wouldn't butt into the conversation anyway, but it sparked me. I said, people are talking about this. I think this is important. And, pertaining to breast cancer risk reduction, fasting for fewer than 13 hours per night was associated with a 36% higher risk of breast cancer recurrence compared to fasting 13 or more hours per night. So what does that translate into? So basically, if we're fasting for greater than 13 hours, if we've already had breast cancer, it's a 36% reduction that we may have a recurrence. Sort of a very specialized, patient population, if you will, or area of people. For the rest of us, I think we have to take this into context. So Rebecca and I had concurred on this recently too, because this topic came up in our area. And so how do we see it? It's generally speaking, eat when we need to, don't eat when we don't need to. It really is that simple. I think sometimes because a lot of us do push long days with our, just hours that we're awake until we go to sleep, I think it's important to have the energy we need, not too much of it, but also to make sure that we're not restricting ourselves, because that flip side is that we have to ensure that we're getting adequate nutrition. And I think sometimes when fasting comes into the picture, it can be done where there's not enough nutritional support given. I was recently speaking with a patient. She was eating, a very limited amount of food in a very limited amount of time. And that's concerning. We have to expand that. We have to open that up and say, we need to support the body. We need to give the lean muscle tissue what it needs. We don't want to fall into eating disordered eating patterns or eating disorders where we can avoid that. Just sort of normalize the food. Let it be food. Let the rest of everything be what it needs to be, and risk reduce wherever else we can, but let's keep that in perspective. So again, I think it comes down to a balanced approach. There's no absolutes. Every one of us is completely different from the next. It's like a fingerprint. We're all unique. I love like the call of the wild, because when people get really hungry, they get really scary. I know I can. So we've got to temper that, and just look at how can we use our food to help us. Natural immunity, adequate nutrition, physical activity, sleep, stress management. This is sort of, a quadrant of things that we have to make sure we're touching on all the touch points, not just one. Create a shift in thinking, best antidote. Eat more plants. Again, the plants are where it's at. The synergistic teamwork of all those foods is going to work together. The good news is there's more consensus than controversy among the literature that exists. So, for any controversy we see, let's look at the consensus that eating more plant foods is really powerful. And then we can individualize that based on our preferences and our cultural traditions. So I'm going to sort of end off here in terms of presenting a call to action. So this is a concept Amanda had also introduced me to, and I love it, because now I challenge you. How can you practice self-care? Trying something new, or take a longstanding practice of yours to the next level, whether it's nutrition, whether it's physical activity, the two in partnership, whatever it might be. But keep in mind that the recommendations for human health and planetary health are essentially the same. So we're meeting a lot of goals with just a few simple interventions most times. So I like to present that out there. And now we'll move to questions. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to pull up, please bear with me technically as we go through this. So I'm going to be manning my own questions. So I'm going to just try to go back time-wise to the initial question. So you say 55% carbs, but I thought carbs make you fat. Awesome question, because this is a big topic that comes up. So carbohydrates are our primary source of fuel, essentially. Best source of energy in terms of what the entire body uses, particularly the brain. The brain cannot function without glucose as a fuel. And carbohydrates are what turn to glucose, which is the other word for sugar, in the body. So the only way that, let's say, excess carbohydrate can turn to fat is if we don't burn it off. So if we're sort of eating a balanced way throughout the day and focusing on more of those plant foods, carbohydrates that, let's say, have fiber, have other nutrients, we're not only feeling more satisfied from them, so it's going to help us eat less, let's say, other processed foods overall, but we're going to burn it off appropriately. So that's really the only way that that can happen. Fat will be utilized as a source of energy, but again, we want to sort of have that be lower and in combination with the carbohydrate and the protein, because all the different nutrients work together. So I hope that's like sort of addresses that. I'm going to answer these sort of concisely just to move through because I want to try to hit everybody. What about taking a cruciferous supplement like DIM? This always comes up when we do a breast presentation. I'm really glad that you put this in. So the thing is, so DIM, and forgive me because I don't have it in front of me exactly the big word. I know it's sort of dimethyl, you know, fill it in. It's basically the phytochemical that is in the cruciferous family. So the thing is, again, when anything is isolated in one single supplement, it's just that. So it's very limited. It's just the effect of that we would be getting if we took that supplement. Plus, the truth of the matter is, and I actually referenced something that I'm going to just reference a term that I thought was really, really interesting called the precautionary principle. So what this basically means is that when an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. Nuts and bolts, what that means is that we can see online that DIM is, you know, DIM is good. But the truth of the matter is there hasn't been enough studies on it. So we don't know. We have to be cautious because if there's another issue, again, like a wild card, that it would interact in the body in some way that could be adverse, that could set us up for something bad, it hasn't been studied, so we just don't know. So we're better off eating the food because in the food, we get all these other components in the process as well. So that's why the cruciferous vegetables are going to give us not only DIM, but so many other chemicals that are helpful, plant chemicals that are helpful. Okay. So I'm seeing another sort of slightly specific question about reducing carbohydrates, eating a 1200 calorie diet to lose weight while on hormone treatment. So that we might need to look at a little bit more specifically on an individual basis. What I would actually say is that because this came up recently in a sort of collaborative conversation, no less than 1200 calories per day, because studies have shown that that's not enough most times to keep the body burning efficiently. We don't want to eat too little calories that then the body goes into a starvation mode. So that would probably be the minimum, maybe less than that depending on the person, but then an individualized nutrition assessment would really be in order. And that's why, you know, we plenty of registered dietitians in our health system, you know, otherwise, depending on, you know, if you don't receive care here, there's a great resource within our Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics to try to find dietitians. But I think in that case, that would call for a more individualized assessment. And so reducing carbohydrates, again, we can go more with the whole food carbohydrates versus refined carbohydrates. In that case, I'd say that we probably want to reduce the refined carbohydrates, white flours, white sugars, and things like that. Oils getting a bad rap. So refined oils too. So this is a little bit of a questionable topic that's come up for sure. I think it depends on how it's processed, how it's refined, how, like, you know, again, there mechanisms of action, chemical, scientific processes for how things work. I think if we're getting something more natural, as far as an olive oil or something, an extra virgin olive oil, that's probably better in that sense. If we want to look at, so then let's say if refined oils are a concern, maybe we want to look more at getting our healthy fats from actual nuts, seeds, avocados. If for digestive reasons or purposes that those can't be utilized, then again, I think an individualized nutrition assessment would be helpful. Flours, pasta, part of my cultural diet too. I get it. I totally get it. And that's why I think that's when we need to reserve those things for either special occasions or portion management. So putting it in the context of, let's say, maybe making the foundation of a meal vegetables with a sprinkling of pasta and protein, it can still be included. We want, you know, we want those foods to be included. Those foods are energy. They're cultural heritage, their association with many good things. Like, I don't think things have to be taken out altogether, but I think when we're relying on that for the mainstay, there's just not enough nutrition in there and potentially more inflammatory components that can put us at higher risk for breast cancer. So we have to just temper everything. Okay, physical activity. So again, touching back on physical activity, benefiting us in so many ways because, you know, not only does it help us utilize our energy efficiently, it decreases inflammation, it boosts immune function, it increases neurotransmitters to help us feel mentally well and balanced. It connects us with community. If we do that with other people, it gives us stress release time alone if we exercise individually. So I think there's so many components to it. You know, as far as breast cancer risk and reduction, I think it's probably connected most to the inflammatory component. And it helps us utilize our blood sugar appropriately for energy and doesn't let it accumulate and then create fat tissue that's often connected with a higher estrogen level and increase our risk. Hi, Dina. Hello to everyone. And rich unsaturated fats turn to saturated fat in the body. So what I would say is for this, I think it's as far as our hydrogenated oils. So if we're getting, let's say, partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated soybean oil, there's the potential that it can turn to saturated fat in the body. So I think those are the ones that are more questionable. And again, sort of wild cards, not as natural, more synthetically processed. Those would probably be the refined oils that I would encourage someone to eliminate before the more natural ones like an extra virgin olive oil. Yeah, so MCT oil is a saturated fat, but there are some benefits. So that's where we're getting the coconut. So coconut is a high source of MCT oil, which is medium chain triglycerides. So it works on a different pathway. And so I think it's a great way to, and again, if somebody likes the flavor of coconut, it's a great way to enhance flavor and to offer those helpful fatty acids. So it sort of tempers maybe decreasing a saturated fat from an animal-based product. So that would indirectly help reduce breast cancer risk. So soy protective versus problematic. So soy is, again, the wild card when it comes to processed, because, and it has to do with the processing. And that might, you know, to be honest, that might be a little bit out of my scope as far as the exact mechanism of action. But I think that can also vary too based on the product, and if it's a brand or it's a particular company, you know, then we kind of get into the whole idea of genetically modified organisms, and that can be concerning with, you know, again, these are sort of genetically engineered. They're not naturally existing. So is the body going to recognize it, or will it turn to something in the body that's questionable? You know, versus the protection that soy can offer if it's from a natural source. You know, you've got soy, what we call isoflavones, which are phytochemicals, plant compounds special to soy. So helpful. Thank you so much, everyone, for all these great questions. Okay, so I'm just looking. Juicing and smoothies to fit in some cruciferous and get to that 9 servings per day. Is this beneficial, or is the research pointing toward the increased fiber associated with eating the whole foods in addition to the micronutrient content as being beneficial to reducing the risk? So awesome question. So basically what it's asking is, juicing and or smoothies, you know, are like, where do they fit into the picture? So I think that it is relative. I think if someone is struggling to get all of those servings of produce in, and it's someone that's on the go and needs that, it's a great way. If somebody's already eating whole fruits and vegetables, then I don't think it's necessarily necessary on top of. It might increase the calorie content over and above what someone needs, you know, increase the energy intake over and above. And then, yes, then we're sometimes losing the fiber. I think that comes down to also the mechanism of action of even the blender or the device that you're using. Some reserve fiber, some don't. You know, there can be a question as far as that goes. And then too, I always wonder, are we really getting the plant compounds in the same, you know, form? Is it being broken down in a way that's maybe not as beneficial as if we're going through the act of actually chewing and breaking down and excreting enzymes that help break things down, and it's in the body that way? But again, I think it's relative. Do I think it's better than soda? Yes. You know, so you know, again, like, I think it's all relative. So if it's something, if someone's going to grab that on the run as opposed to grabbing, you know, maybe a coffee that's got a lot of sugar or something to keep them going, it's a more natural way that you're going to get a better sustained source of energy that way. Okay. And almond milk. So almond milk can definitely fit into the picture. I think that's a great question. It's a good source of many nutrients. What I'm finding lately, because I'm starting to do a lot of digging into sustainability and environmentalism and the aspect of that that's related to all these foods, I think we have to look at how things are produced. I think, again, it goes back to companies. We can also make our own almond milk. That's an interesting consideration, you know, so if that's something you want to venture and do, I haven't done it yet, I'll be honest, but I was reading about doing it and I was like, this isn't as involved as I thought it would be. I'm going to need to try this, you know, and just kind of seeing. But if that's not an option, then I think looking for the cleanest and most transparent brand. And to be honest, I'm still in the process of finding that myself, because you know, I go and I look and I learn and I try things sometimes just to get a sense. So if people do ask me, if patients do ask me, you know, what about this product? What do you think? And I recently came across, you know, there's a lot of almond milks and dairy-free milks that they're now putting out and purporting as creamier and creamy and creamy. And I'm like, okay, so what makes it creamy? And it's processed oil. And it's like, well, why would we want that? Even if it's a plant-based oil, you know, at some point, it is what it is. Natural almond milk might not need to be as creamy. And if you get used to it, you might not need that. So we have to be careful with how things are produced. And also, I think the maximizing like what we can get out of them. So if someone can't eat dairy, but they're looking to eat or drink their calcium and get their calcium in, that's a great source. You know, is it as absorbable? Maybe, maybe not, depending on the brand. So we have to kind of dig into, you know, all that. But I think overall, it's a great thing, because I think a lot of people just tolerate it better. I think lactose intolerance is a big issue, and sometimes people don't even tolerate the lactose-free products as well. So, you know, again, another issue that kind of leads back to the gut, and can we support that with whole food, plants, prebiotics? So, awesome questions. Wow. I think that's it. I think one more. Okay, sorry, narrowing down to it. Thanks, Cheryl. What about fresh, raw versus cooked plant foods? So fantastic question. Thank you, Marina. And so again, I think it's all relative. I think that, you know, if we're assessing someone individually and we look at the components of, okay, if they aren't having a problem chewing, I think if we really have to get in there and chew and break down those fibers as much as possible to make it more digestible, so that then people aren't experiencing as much gas. Because that's a concern. I think a lot of times people maybe go a little bit more on the raw side, and there's that issue, and then they get off put to wanting to do it at all. So how do we temper that? I think that's where cooked plant foods can come in really helpful. Do we get the same nutrients across the board? And generally speaking, I think, again, if it's not cooked down too much, you know, kind of giving it enough of a crunch to still be able, where those components are still pretty active. But, you know, the flip side is, one of the greatest things I think for most people, you know, even into adulthood, but a lot of children, sometimes they just want to eat the fresh, you know, they don't want to eat the cooked yet. They're very off put. So how can we hook them in and, you know, put out a platter of things that have fresh foods? And it's a good way to sort of get used to that. And I think really with this question, I like this, because I think seasonally it comes into it, right? Like, so when it's hot out, we're looking for colder foods to kind of help us feel, you know, not so cranky from the heat, you know, versus when we're in 20-degree weather, we're looking for like cooked foods and warm foods and soups and stews and things. So, you know, if you look at it over the pattern of time, eating seasonally, eating sort of intuitively really helps and makes a big difference, because over time you're going to get both if you do it that way. So that's probably what I'd go with. So hold on. I think we might have one more. Okay. All right, good. So I think we've got all the questions addressed. I'd like to wrap this up, and just bear with me one more second. And thank you. But I look forward to seeing many of you in person. I thank you so much for attending today. Thank you.